To open a conference is never an easy task, because in some ways you have to ask yourself how to set the stage for the topic at stake. And to speak about the world of cities is obviously a very large topic, and in a way I think we have to start with a very large question, which is really, how do we want to live? As architects, we're continuously in the position to either be asked to decide things and control things, or to believe that we decide and control things. Obviously, at the same time, we know that our actual range of influence is limited. Nonetheless, as we design and as we decide, I think a very important question always is, how much do we want to decide, and how much do we maybe want to leave open? The visions of architecture, and this is obviously not a vision of architecture per se, but it's a vision of Hollywood, of the safe and secure yet entirely artificial life. And for me, this image still embodies very explicitly the question, what world do we want to live in, and how clean, how safe, how good, or how interesting, how full of tension do we want it, or is it? If we look at the vision of architects for cities back, let's start about roughly 100 years back, a vision for Germany, all about order, efficiency. The vision for Paris by Corbusier, the first one was Hilbersheimer, this is Corbusier. In a way, not much different. Ideas of efficiency, of how to reorder the city. The metabolists, about 30 years later, maybe had a slightly more exciting spatial vision of how things like that could look like, and I have to say I still think some of the potentials of the thoughts developed then remain underexplored today. The Americans tried to keep a lid on, Buckminster Fuller, safeguarding New York, Manhattan, whereas the Britons, you couldn't keep a lid on. They did cities that were walking away if it wasn't so pleasant anymore, and maybe created some of the most actually futuristic visions that have ever been there so far of a city. A project that I still think is one of the most radically beautiful ones, Cedric Price's idea for the Fun Palace, a space of freedom for people to explore and to decide what they wanted to do wherever they wanted to do it. But if we look back again at film and at the movies, in a way, the visions of the future city are actually much older than in architecture almost. Fritz Lang, Metropolis, way before any of what we just saw, kind of sketched a vision that has in a way almost not much progressed ever since. The only thing that has happened to the city is it has started to decay. Blade Runner, still one of the key visions of urban space. And if we look at the sci-fi cities of today in the movies, they're actually not that much different. They haven't moved on that much. It's more tech, but also more decay. This is a picture I just took last week in Shanghai, and we can see to some extent our cities are indeed not that far away from all these visions. This I also took last week when I was in Taipei, and we can clearly sense the enormity of the challenge that the city presents to us, the enormity of the city itself, and obviously, as I'm sure all of you are well aware, that by now more than half of the world's population already lives in cities. So what can these cities really be? Yesterday I just arrived from this city, from Hong Kong, and I'm sure also you know what is happening there, and you realize that the city is obviously not just a space of planning, it's also a space of conflict, it's a space of protest, and it's a civic space with certain rights that I think we as architects need to comprehend as well, because ultimately we design cities for the people that inhabit them. The sense of conflict has long existed, more staggeringly, again, in the movies. 2 years ago, we were told, 2012, it was the end of the world, and a nice movie showed us how the decay of the environment will ultimately lead to the complete disappearance of cities altogether on the planet. And obviously, It is not only the danger of the environment, all kinds of other dangers lurk against which architects are rarely prepared or have prepared their buildings. And with that, I want to finally arrive at our little monster here in Singapore. Singapore is an incredible place. It's repeatedly been one of the most, voted one of the most livable cities in Asia, and indeed I think it has achieved an enormous amount of care and planning for its city. However, if we look at not necessarily the flashy part that we're in right now, but simply if we look at the generic part of the city for me embodies an issue that is not specific to Singapore alone, but really specific to the moment of cities in time that we're facing. Cities are increasingly dense, increasingly vertical, but they're also increasingly determined no longer by a vision for the greater public need, but essentially by individual buildings built by individual, mostly developers. And the difficulty that that generates is that you get a series of towers, mostly towers, a series of buildings, one next to the other, each one built for itself in its own right, either a good building or a not so good building. But the big issue is what actually happens in between all those buildings, what has happened to the space of the city, and what has happened to the space that we inhabit as a civic group of people. Singapore has the great luck to have this powerful, beautiful tropical nature, which is very obvious in this image how it acts as a glue and in a way glues all the disparate buildings together. But if you imagine this space without the green, you would very quickly see that it's primarily an unconsidered space. The only thing that is considered are the objects of architecture. And I think it is maybe a very important point to reconsider the autonomy of architecture in that sense and see it much rather in the context of the city's greater enterprise. The first project I want to show, and I'm sure some of you in the room might very well know this, is the Interlace here in the city. It is not in the very center, but rather further outside, Alexandra Road, Depot Road, along the expressway, basically along one of the largest green belts that Singapore has. So it's a project explicitly and intimately connected to nature. It's a very large project also, 1,040 units, 170,000 square meters of GFA. And on the site, we had a 24-story height limit. So the typical answer would have looked like everything else, about 12 towers, 24 floors, with this little mini, again, tower city. But what quality of life does this actually generate? The towers would be so close that there's very little privacy for the inhabitants, but especially the space in between is nothing but residual. And I wanted to think of how we could challenge this notion of the isolated individual tower and think of more of a structural idea. How could we live together? How could a building complex express not isolation, but actually togetherness? Exactly when I started the project in 2007, I found this postcard, which was precisely written 100 years earlier, and it shows what Singapore was in a way not that long ago. It was a little fishing village. And the village, I think, is a very interesting thing that we somehow seem to have forgotten some of its qualities, because the village still was about, indeed, a social ecosystem and much less an individualistic propagation of singularities. And I wanted to see how we could translate some of the qualities of this interlinked network of these little buildings and how we could project that into the current contemporary situation of housing. And basically what I did was, if you like, we toppled the towers. We put the vertical into the horizontal, created a series of housing blocks, and then started to stack them up vertically. this not only creates a very interlinked network of spaces and a dramatic space in itself, but if you look from the top, what is maybe most important is it creates spaces. It is no longer architecture as object, but actually as a generator for space and urban space. The hexagonal pattern forms these very large courtyards that suddenly become spaces to live, spaces to inhabit for the residents, and in a way enlarge and expand their territory within their own housing community. And with that, the courtyards actually, the spaces of the gardens become the matter of identity, the pieces through which people that live there will ultimately identify where they live. There are plazas for theater activities, a bamboo garden, there are big water parks, many different identities. There are more adventure-like spaces for the children, the big swimming pools, and even the fire truck route, a necessity that we have to provide, I turned into an exactly 1 kilometer long running track. So in a way, everything that we needed, we turned into something that maybe we want and we can do something with. We paid great attention to the environment where in the tropics, we looked at the intricate nature of the self-shading of this complex to prove that all apartments would have sufficient daylight. But also, and based on that, we optimized actually the choice of facade materials. But we could also prove that the geometry of the building would provide sufficient shading to the courtyards throughout the year, that they remain usable in this tropical heat. We positioned water bodies according to the prevalent flows of the air, of the wind directions, to use every swimming pool and every water pond as a means to, through evaporative cooling, create and reinforce the quality of the microclimates in the courtyards. So a whole series of, if you like, passive strategies to use the design itself to accomplish a number of things rather than rely on technology added to the system. But the whole idea was to integrate this project in nature and in a way fuse the spaces of community with the spaces of green and nature. I think what will ultimately for me be the success of the project is a layering of a kind of gradient of spaces that range from the communal and public to the more and more individual, to give a true richness of experience in this project and a choice of where you want to be, more alone by yourself or more shared in an environment with the community you inhabit. And because we turned the vertical into the horizontal and we then greened all the roof terraces of those big blocks, and if we add the ground plus these roofs, we have 112% green of the site. So a lot more nature than not having built any building. But the importance is this green is not decorative green edges, little furry lines that make things look green. These are gardens that are usable for the people. These are spaces that are usable. And for me, there's a big difference between the alibi of green or the true meaning and function of green. Some of you saw the project under construction here, and now it is completed and mostly inhabited. This is a shot from a drone, actually, from above, which shows how true, in a way, the executed version is to its original design intent. And maybe this image shows most beautifully the kind of intricate nature and the multiplicity and the richness of the spaces that exist. And as you are there, and I would encourage all of you that are here in Singapore to find time to go there, because I think actually the photographs don't do justice to what it is. What for me is really the most incredible thing is the variety of the things that this space offers. People that live there, you can have your roof terrace with a city view where you like to escape. You can hide in the spa garden. You have so many places to choose from, and all of this in a really dramatic kind of spatial setting that I think redefines the relationship between building and urban habitat in a very explicit way. This is the 12th floor. The building is technically still a skyscraper. It's 24 stories. But we've created all these new datums for inhabitation in that system. And I think how the building ultimately integrates with the nature that will slowly start to overgrow it as it has become completed is what will ultimately, I think, embed the project in its true meaning. A second project I want to show, also in Singapore, Duo, is at Beach Road and Ophir Rocher Road. I think also this for me is a very good example of what I just spoke about at the beginning. Somebody built one building, somebody else built another building, and what happened in between is a kind of disastrous piece of no man's land with actually no destination, no meaning, and almost no chance for survival. We were asked to design a project there, which was nearly impossible because after we had started, somebody came to us and said, you know, this site is actually nearly unbuildable because this building to the right is so pointy and the blades pointing at it, feng shui, is so problematic that you actually can't really build there. The city's zoning envelope described essentially two towers that were possible. In the middle, we had to keep a view corridor open for the Parkview building on that side. And you can see that if we would have simply added two objects again to this context, it would have been only more disastrous than the situation before. So I thought instead of conceiving the building as an object and as a piece by itself, and instead of denying that there are maybe the two ugliest neighbors in the city, why don't we try to rather co-opt them and make them part of a new urban definition of spaces and of functions that would in a way fix and repair the city. So instead of buildings as objects, I started to carve away from the allowable mass of the buildings. I cut out a series of spaces that I want to create to keep two floor plates, a bigger footprint for the hotel and offices and a more slender piece for the residences. But most importantly, we created a series of urban spaces that would co-opt the neighboring buildings and involve them suddenly in the formation of a clearly defined urban setting, which ultimately even helped to avoid any collision of points and building facades, which would have been considered problematic. But ultimately, you can sense how facades together suddenly start to form urban definition. These are images that, in a way, show how we use these circular spaces to define a new series of, in this case, courtyards of really urban scale, with the idea to create a center for this Bugis district with Kampong Glam adjacent to it, and really draw people into the central courtyard with a series of public offerings, restaurants, cafes, as a place for people to be and eat. But at the same time, I am sculpting the two towers. So what in footprint still looked quite simple, I'm then sculpting two more expressive silhouettes that also, in a way, embody the interplay between this pair of towers. And the project is actually a joint venture between the Malaysian and Singaporean government, a relatively rare thing, as I'm sure most of you know. It was a big step for both to come together and start this joint venture to explore what the two countries in a way could do together. And what I was interested in was to find a synergetic expression of, in a way, this maybe somewhat odd couple that comes together, but that starts to have not only a positive effect on each other, but actually on its surroundings and the context of the city as a whole. The idea is really, you could jokingly say, is a bit borrowed from history. Villa Rotunda by Palladio, one of the great Renaissance architects, he defined a very simple architectural problem. He designed a square building, but in the middle he wanted a cupola, a dome, with a perfectly round space. So the question was, how would he negotiate between these two geometries? And what he invented was a wall that would simply change in thickness. And this wall would contain all the utilitarian things you actually didn't want to clutter the house: staircases, maids' rooms, all sort of storage spaces. And he created this poche, these walls that would change in thickness, that were actually simply used to define spaces. So our idea is not too dissimilar. We're using our building to define these urban spaces, and in a way, it's almost the leftover. It's the part that in a very functional yet spatially explicit way defines these things. It also resolves the energy flows, both the esoteric ones, but also the natural ones, the way it catches the winds again in those circular shapes and will use them for cooling of the courtyard spaces so that the outdoors remain usable. A very important ambition of this project was to not turn it into a removed and even gated community, but actually to declare it an integral part of the public city. And we together with the client, we worked and agreed on an idea that we created a naturally ventilated space that would remain open 24 hours throughout the day, not lock down, not block things, but actually act as a big connector between the various parts. We're lifting the car drop-offs on an upper level that you can see here, basically to the left, so that the ground is entirely free of traffic and a big urban space that activates the flow through the entire site and really positions the project as a civic nucleus, as a kind of nexus that binds underground subway station, bus stop, historic district, Bugis, and all parts of the city together in a very fluid and permeable system. But we also make the upper levels of the building accessible with a viewing deck, with sky gardens, partly for the residents, for the hotel, and the public, that will further activate the three-dimensional urban space of the city. The project has started construction, and I think early next year we are coming out of the ground, so to speak, on Beach Road. Another project, also not too far away, we're slowly moving from Singapore now to Malaysia, a building that I was asked to design right next to the Petronas Towers in KL. Designing next to a building like that in a way poses a specific challenge in itself. How do you do something special if right next to you is the most special thing the city has? And if we look at this building, we may, as architects, feel that it's a building of an era that maybe no longer is there in the same way. It was a building that was about being the tallest, being an expression of power, and in a way having that presence. But it was not necessarily a building that was about the inclusion of the city or the openness. And we asked ourselves, how could we conceive and in a way, not in confrontation, but rather as an extension to the identity of that place, design a building that would be much more about an inclusive sense of the Malaysian society as a whole. The client asked us to design 2 towers on the site because one they wanted to sell off and one they wanted to keep. The problem was that the site is actually much too small for 2 buildings. It doesn't fit. It's a highly, highly dense piece of land. The other problem I thought was to do a mini twin next to a maxi twin would also not be a good idea. In a way, a competition you could only lose. To do a single tower also had a problem because obviously which part do you sell off, which one do you keep? It was a bit hard to negotiate, and there are so many other towers amongst which it would essentially disappear. So I was interested in the question, could we do a tower, a building that was actually not a building, but that was a multiplicity of things, and that would express a multiple sense of the society and of the city, and that through its own geometry and massing could maybe evoke a sense of a kind of delicate balance of many pieces and parts that need each other, yet that form a multiple whole. The idea was to create 3 main blocks, one to accommodate the residences, one for the hotel, one for the offices, but then to have them float and balance on these open horizontal levels, the ground and sky levels as we called them, and then have this part absorb the life, the active, busy life of the public and of the tropical city. So an idea to basically say, why don't we let the energy of the city and the energy of the street enter the building and continue what usually in buildings only exists very separately. You put the parking into the basement or a deck, you put the shops into a mall, you put the offices up above, and the rest is all separate from each other. And I said, why don't we take what we have in the city and what makes the city exciting, the cars, the people, the pedestrians, the green and the shops, and basically create a continuity. So we formed a spiral movement of public space and retail that would spiral up the base of the building. And we intertwined a second spiral, like a double helix for the movements of the cars. We brought in all the green and the gardens, again, of the tropical city, the power of this nature, and created an open base that almost dematerializes and really acts as a continuity of the space of the urban fabric around it. But most importantly, I wanted to make this space a celebration of all the cultures and the realities in Malaysia. It is a society in which Malay, Muslims, Chinese, many parts, many religions coexist, in which many parts of this society in a way coexist. So instead of separating those, we also wanted to celebrate the mix of cultures, and this really as a sense of global place. So we have swimming pools of the hotel, Malaysian gardens, we have a Chinese food court, the Muslim prayer rooms in the center with a very prominent position. We have car parking, retail, we have more public space. So the idea to really celebrate cultures in a building rather than deny their existence, I think is the most powerful statement of this project. And part of that then we lift up into the sky at the intersection of the 3 volumes to also make this space accessible to the public and in a way explore the stunning views of the surrounding city from this very point. And the building was really, I think, conceived as a symbol of openness towards the city. And I'm interested in how a tower can in a way project its activity and its public, first of all, how it can attract public life and accommodate public life, and then also how it can give that life back to the city in its very architectural expression. A project in Bangkok. Again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with that city. It's an incredible city. It's quite a crazy city. It's probably the city with the craziest architecture. There are robot buildings, elephant buildings, kind of UFO buildings. Basically, it's a city in which every building is already so strong and so expressive that I was wondering what we could do. And I thought the most interesting in this case would be the most boring, just to do nothing and extrude a simple square. But obviously that is nothing and is too boring. And in a way, it shows exactly the struggle of the skyscraper. A building form that reaches a scale that is so large that it becomes completely divorced from any sense of human inhabitation. And I wanted to find a way to actually show that there are people in this building and to find a way to use the activity of these people to define the image of the building, to have the building speak about its activities back to the city. So I started to erode this shaft with a small pixelated texture. And you can see the idea was to integrate the small, more human scale of the historic city, still partly around the tower there, and basically bring it up into the 314 meters of this tower. But it was also a sense of almost an unfinished building, something that looks nearly incomplete, that is maybe provocative even in the idea of what is a building when it's still alive. And this space, but this gesture is not a purely formal gesture to create an image, but it is actually the idea to create a very active space for the residents. Terraces, living rooms that project out, and suddenly on the 17th floor you can have a 300 square foot terrace, which a normal skyscraper could just never provide. Also, where the building comes down, again, a question, how does a tower engage the ground and the city? It's a kind of soft series of terraced cascading platforms that again are activated not with retail, but with food and beverage, with a whole series of more social activities and enterprises to create a space that would really attract the life of the city and in a way bring the life of the city, if you like, literally up the tower. This was an image I showed actually 4 years ago to the client, and it may remind of what I showed at the beginning, but I said, you know, when we create a space of public meaning, we also have a responsibility, and we will have to be aware of the fact that these are maybe the spaces also of public expression. And I think it's maybe part of our reality to not only accept that, but to also really allow for that. The public is not confined to the ground. Again, the very top of the building we're making accessible to everybody in a huge sky and observation deck, which at 314 meters will give 360 degrees views across the city. But obviously the sense of excitement of floating above the metropolis was one of the very important parts. Construction started a while ago. This is the smaller cube building, as we call it, which will open early next year. And the tower is now halfway up in Bangkok and will stand as Bangkok's tallest building at this point in time. Finally, a building that Paul mentioned, that I'm sure you all know, but that when we talk about cities and architecture and the meaning of architecture or the effects of architecture would be impossible not to show. The idea was as simple as radical, to say skyscrapers are all about verticality, but what if we thought about a skyscraper that would subvert verticality and in a way turn the needle back into itself, simply into a loop of interconnected activities where no longer the top was the best, the bottom the worst, that no longer was a very simplistic diagram of hierarchy where the top always rules, but also the sense that buildings can no longer be about height if they want to attain any meaning. It's the headquarters for China's national television station, and with that, a highly complex system of cooperating parts and units. The idea was really to create a system, we said, where the head knows what the hands are doing and vice versa, where we would reunite all people involved in a joint production process of media in one single building. Normally, television stations exist rather dispersed throughout the city, and actually nobody knows quite exactly what his co-workers or the organization as a whole are doing. We thought it was a very important and powerful gesture to say, what if we bring people physically back together in an age where maybe work is no longer bound to physical properties, and particularly in the world of media, where the product itself has become virtual and is no longer physical, where in a way, in that sense, if you like, the distance between the individual and its actual work and output is increasingly exacerbated. So the idea where news, broadcasting, program production, research and training centers, a whole series of special functions would join in this loop of activities. And I still like this image very much because it doesn't look like a building. If you kind of think of what it reminds you of, most probably you remember in your biology classes in school when you saw the open body with organs and systems. And I think simply that trigger of thinking of a building as an organism, as a life form, rather than a purely tectonic matter of material, light and space, I think is very exciting and very important. And the building is indeed a mixture between technical installations. These are the blue are the program studios, green the news studios, the broadcast control room, that are intertwined with a series of social systems. Canteens, restaurants, cafes, meeting rooms, more informal chat corners and social spaces that in a way join the entire system from a pure building into really a live organism. And all of this joined together through the circulation of, again, a loop-like system of elevators and horizontal transport that make both to staff and to the public the building ultimately accessible. The building is so large that at that point it was the second largest building in the world ever built, inhabited by 14 to 15,000 people. And to simply understand scale, and this is obviously a challenge also we work with in Asia more explicitly than anywhere else at this point, I think it's very important to understand what we do. So what we actually did in the office, I said one day, nobody works, everybody takes a cutter, and we cut 14,000 little sticks, and then we glue them onto a model. And this was simply an exercise for our own team to comprehend what a number like that actually means. Because I think we have lost totally touch with what numbers are. We're talking about such big numbers, but if you don't understand simply the burden of a quantity or the challenge of a quantity, I don't think you can do the right things for it. And in a way, this was a very playful exercise, but these were very important moments in a process to do that. And I think equally, as we think in even larger contexts, in cities or other things, we need to make sure we actually understand the things we're talking about. A few images of the interiors. This is the main lobby, a direct link to the underground subway station, the canteens at the top of the building, the offices, and the main broadcast control center. It's actually double-sided like this, a bit of a James Bond villain moment. From here, CCTV can broadcast 300 channels simultaneously, which makes it by far the largest media organization in the world. This is the building in the city, but you can see how the building in a way challenges space, and I think one of the most stunning things about it is every few meters you move, the building completely changes in perception and expression. And if you see from below, you can see here at the very tip there are these three little round circles, and at this point this is part of the future public trajectory that goes through the building, and this is where you can stand on the glass and see the city pass by in slow motion 180 meters below you. The building has since become, in a way, a very normal part of the city, almost, still with stark contrasts, but there are a few spots where almost at any point of the day you find a handful of photographers shooting the building, so kind of a natural formation of photo ops. But the building has, in a way, done more. It completely went beyond itself. It started to change the real estate environment around it. All developers that were building towers in the vicinity started to advertise with a view to the building, and any building with a view kind of raised prices by 30 to 50%. Even residential developments far out of town, you can see it there lurking on the horizon, sort of felt it was an important reference that you still lived in the city close to that building. Others thought it should be better in Shanghai and put it into Pudong. Artists had a much better idea than us, but our engineers unfortunately couldn't make it work. A cake shop nearby turned it into a wedding cake, also that a real achievement of engineering in an earthquake city. That's Beijing is basically like Time Out for Beijing. And this was a cover a few years ago, which I thought was in a way very nice because it really showed that the building had become an urban actor, basically a persona. It was no longer just a thing that stood in the city, but it played the same role as many other people that started to transform and change the city. It obviously received its acknowledgements from New York Times to CTBUH and other things, but I think its very, very most important moment was still this one, when we were called and we had no idea, and somebody said, "Do you know CCTV's in The Simpsons?" And simply what this embodies is that I think architecture can go and have a meaning completely beyond itself. If it is more than what it usually is, I think it can really engage culture in a broader sense, from the profound to the pop, from the common to the elitist. And I think how to engage a society remains one of the greatest challenges that we as architects have. A footnote, one of the interesting things about that building is, I mentioned it's the second biggest building completed in the world so far. If you would unloop the loop and stretch it back up, the building would actually be 750 meters tall with a very large floor plate. So you see, it was also a strange exercise in making something very big much smaller than it actually is. And I think also that is an interesting quality for me of this project. It stands in Beijing, very largely in operation and in function. The thing I want to end my talk on is a very different project, but a project that I think is maybe equally meaningful, but at the opposite end of the scale spectrum. Friends of mine founded a film festival in Thailand and decided to host it outside Phuket. and invited me as basically as a friend, and then said, like, what do you think we should do here for our film festival? And I said, I think it's very clear, if we're in this stunningly beautiful landscape, why don't we make a cinema that floats on water, that floats on the ocean as we watch the movies, and that creates an atmosphere in a way that has never existed, but that is very cinematographic in its own right. There was almost no budget for all of that, so I said, we are on islands, they're inhabited by fishermen, so let me meet the fishermen. And of course, there was a very simple thing they did. Their lobster farms were built in the most rudimentary and cheap way. They took styrofoam blocks, wrapped them in mosquito net for protection, cut up old tires to have rubber strings, and simply knotted them onto a few planks with an approximate structural grid of 5 by 5 meters. We took the same system, worked with the fishermen on slightly adapting it to build a modular platform of what we then called Archipelago Cinema that would float in the ocean. And at night, we watched movies in this very emotionally intense and extreme atmosphere. Tilda Swinton and Joe Apichatpong curated the films. We had one of the first movies ever, 1904, Alice in Wonderland, restored by the British Film Archive. The MoMA film curator, Josh Siegel, was there. Many things that kind of went to a very archaic moment of the experience of film and the city and the countryside. And after that, the platform traveled to Venice, where as well we screened movies. And I simply want to end with this image because maybe it embodies, in contrast to the very first one that I started the talk with, a sense of adventure and a sense of uncertainty. And I think in what we do for the places where we live, we cannot only think about control, but in many ways we also have to think about what we don't control, what we leave open, and what we leave for others to decide. Thank you.